part of the purpose of this podcast called Stepwise is to put forward the notion of wisdom as an essential component of leading other people. What does that mean? Do we all have to be my age to lead other people? No. Can wisdom be applied if you're 30 years old? Absolutely. Wisdom is the sum total of our life's experiences, our strengths, our failures, stuff we've learned from, scar tissue, all that stuff, applied presently in the moment, without bias, without judgment, that kind of stuff. When we can lead from that place, whether we're 30 or 70, we are going to be leading other people better.
Welcome back to Stepwise. Today we are flipping the script and interviewing our host, Dr. Foster Mobley. My name is Jana Devan. I'm a business owner, having run my marketing business Zettist for about 10 years. I've also had the privilege of working alongside Foster. In my time working with him, I've had a front row seat to his leadership. The way he asks questions, engages, thinks through problems, and speaks about his work in his life. He's a leader through and through. So today I am so grateful to get to talk to him about his journey as a business owner, dive deeper into the subjects from this season of Stepwise, and ask the questions I've always been curious about. We will talk about empathy, compassion, reverse mentorship, honoring, and even how fiction is currently one of his teachers. So I really hope you enjoy this episode of Stepwise, where we talk to Dr. Foster Mobley. Last season, we got to wrap up the season by having a really great conversation about your reflections on leadership in general. So I wanted to do that again this season, get your insight, and really dive into a few of the key subjects that were covered in season 2 of Stepwise. So first, really wanting to dive into this subject of empathy and get your perspective on what that looks like in leadership. So as a very broad question, what is your insight into what empathy means in leadership?
I start from the perspective of the suffering that leaders are going through during this tumultuous time. They don't use the word suffering, but they're incredibly challenged to balance all these myriad factors of multi-generations and social justice and kind of workforce humanity and geopolitics and markets changing and uncertainty and all of that stuff. And they're trying to do it in a way that brings the best of their organization's talent and resources to bear on very uncertain markets. The reason I mention that and starting it from that place is that leaders' job, in my opinion, is still to try and use the many talents and human and otherwise capabilities in their organizations to try and perform. Empathy is a critical element of workforce talent and engagement. It just is. It is. People want to work for bosses they care about. People want to work for bosses that care about them. People want to know, and they want to know others are interested and supportive of things going on in the rest of their lives, not just their job description. And so empathy is an essential element. That said, it's a really hard time for leaders to think outside themselves and that contextual changes that I mentioned before and find a modicum of empathy for others. And yet it's so critical to do. So how do you do that? How do you lean into the need for kind of empathic connection? First of all, you recognize the continued need to do that. Second one is you really have to get yourself in a place where you're not coming from a place of burnout, stress, depletion. Your oxygen mask is on first, as they say in the airlines, and that when you are grounded, you can have your attention and gaze on someone else and listen to them more patiently, with more silence in your responses, with less judgment, those kinds of things. So still critical, hard to do, especially in today's charged environment. Starts with powerful mindfulness practices of the leader so that they can come from a supportive place.
That brings up like a two-part question from me, which is, we know that employees are skeptical right now of these places, churches, the government, everywhere really. They're looking to business leaders to kind of guide them right now. But as a leader, when you know that someone might be coming at you with this skeptical point of view, how do you deal with that? And how would you suggest a leader kind of coming out of their own head and coming to empathy authentically when there's skepticism clearly coming towards them?
Yeah, the sign of disengagement isn't skepticism, or the sign of disagreement is not skepticism. The sign of disagreement is a disengagement.
Hmm.
Like if people are not interested in establishing or reestablishing a connection, they just check out. They'll go somewhere else. In the athletic world, it is they put their name in the transfer portal. Well, businesses have had the transfer portal forever. They're called job hunts or job searches or Indeed.com. It's interesting. I heard a really wonderful analogy over the weekend. We were with some dear friends in Colorado, and one of them is former private pilot, and he was describing his early training somewhere, and he was practicing touch and goes. So they, with an instructor, they land and then they take right off again. Something happened. They got a crosswind in one of his early flights, and the plane bucked over on its side and went into kind of a death spiral.
Wow.
Now, fortunately, he had a trained instructor with him. Instructors and then pilots, certified pilots, are taught to instinctively, when that happens, you put the nose down into the ground. So you point your plane at the ground and you give it gas. You increase airspeed over the wings that will allow the plane to finally begin flying again, which is the purpose of a plane. I can't think of anything more counterintuitive than coming out of a nosedive by putting your nose into the ground and increasing airspeed. And yet that's the way to do it. And I would say the same thing I think that analogy applies really well for how do you deal with skepticism in the workplace? How do you deal with anger in the workplace? How do you deal with disengagement in the workplace? Point the nose into the ground and give it airspeed. What does that mean? It means that you lean into it, you find out about it, you inquire about it, you don't argue it, you don't deny it, you don't pretend it's not there. You recognize it's there and you go into it. Put the nose into the ground. Tell me what it is that's causing you such difficulty. I understand you've got an issue right now. Let's talk about that. How in what ways am I contributing to that? Because it's not my intention, but I may be unaware of how I'm contributing. But you really lean into it and increase the airspeed. To me, increasing the airspeed is increasing the flow of communication between leader and follower. It's that same analogy. I think it really works. Others have described it as when you see a thistle in the ground, which is a big topic for us landowners in Montana because Scotch thistle is everywhere. But when you see a thistle, don't walk around it, grab it and pull it out because otherwise you're going to be dealing with it forever. Put the nose into the ground, increase airspeed. Now, we're all too tired to do that. We're all too stressed to do that. There are many things we need to worry about. But, handling that skepticism in that moment will pay dividends and save hours of time later by not addressing it and feeling uncomfortable and letting the discomfort drive our leadership actions, which it never should.
Wow. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm hearing potentially you saying that skepticism, anger, frustration is engagement.
They're signs of engagement. They absolutely are. I learned that years and years and years ago from the Forum Corporation, that I believe is still around, and some dear friends there. It's where I met my wife, Kathy, through the Forum Corporation of Boston. And they had a sales training program. And they basically said, how do you handle objections? You encourage the objection. Because if somebody's not interested enough to object, they're going to check out, they're going to go buy somewhere else. But if they're willing to engage in a conversation, your price is too high. Great. Tell me what value you think you're getting for this. Yeah, price is pretty high. And we sell on value. But anyway, it's engaging in that. It's leaning into that thing. Not denying, not deflecting, not obfuscating, not running around. But let's find out, because those people are engaged. They just want help. They just want a leg up. We're all kind of swimming in the soup right now.
And it brings up what you said in your first answer, which is that a leader needs to be grounded in themselves in order to receive the skepticism and anger and be able to ask what's going on. How can we make changes to bring you back on board onto this other side of your emotions?
Yeah.
And what's the first step in that? If someone is like skeptical of meditation or waking up and doing their morning pages like you do, how can someone tiptoe into this like groundedness in themselves as a leader?
I don't care how people go about it, but they need to slow their souls down. By that, I mean, my next book, I swear to you, is going to be called The Crack That Lets the Light In.
Hmm.
We all need a crack that allows us to breathe. It allows us to ground. It allows us to slow down because the soul doesn't think at the same pace the brain does,
Hmm.
right? Somebody brings up an issue and our brains are racing ahead. We can think at 300 words a minute. People speak at 150 words a minute. We are racing to complete their sentences and to provide answers before we've really ever heard them. You know, the deep listening that people are really valuing and that stuff. I don't care what it takes. People have talked about the value of being out in nature. Go for a walk for 10 minutes.
Mm.
They call them the fancy way of, new age way of saying it's a nature bath. Go take a nature bath for 10 minutes. Or go get outside your building or whatever it is. I don't care what it is. I don't want people to become yogis and Pilates instructors, although those are useful things. That's not what we're talking about for business. We are talking about ways to slow yourself down, to be present to another human being so that we can truly listen without racing to complete their thoughts, racing to a solution. And you know this from having a partner in life. Our partners don't necessarily want us to solve our problems. They just want to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
Want to be heard. And that's the way we're finding with people. So if you can't get yourself into a place where you can empathically and quietly hear another and really be curious about what's driving their thoughts, then go take a walk.
I love that. One of the first years I had in my business, I was working with a salesperson as a mentor and asking like, why am I so terrible at this? Like, please just help me. And he said, push the damn mute button, meaning like, just listen. You don't need to be talking over someone. And for me, at that point in my career, I felt like the more I said and the more I tried to convince, that would bring, this sort of sale to me. But even just in my marriage or in friendships, I've
Yep.
really taken that like the mute button is important, but also listening while the mute button's on and not trying to think of my next words.
It's cliche, but it's true. There are two kinds of listening to respond or listening to understand.
Hmm.
And most people listen to respond. And so consequently, again, they're filling in words and meanings and they're piling on. I'm a huge believer in less is more. Ask the question, shut up, listen, make a comment in a sentence. If people want more, they'll ask, or you can test for understanding. I was in a conversation recently where every truth that was spoken by somebody else in the group would come and pile onto it, in which case words were not needed. Other than an affirmation, wow, got it. And consequently, it's like it starts to diminish the value of dialogue. And then now suddenly you've got less time and less oxygen. And so everybody's trying to pile on and get their point of view across as opposed to less is more. Huh. Interesting. Say more.
Yeah.
Very powerful in conversational intelligence.
Say more should be another one of those sayings. Tell me more about that.
Yeah.
Let me listen more. I think that's beautiful. So, do you see empathy as a non negotiable for C suite leaders, or is that kind of like a trendy thing to latch on to today in the business world?
I get sarcastic sometimes. As anybody that's been around me for 5 seconds knows, you only need to show empathy if you want to get results. That's it. You don't want to get results, don't bother. So that's my snarky way of saying it's a non negotiable. The job of a leader is to create aligned, committed, passionate followers. That assumes that they've been hired to do they've got the right talent to do their work and to work together and to have, modicum of, wisdom and, be good contributors and good citizens. That assumes all of that. But that's what a leader's job is to do. You want to create alignment? Find out what they hear in your direction. You want to hear, committed? Listen to them. Because there's a difference between compliance, telling somebody what to do and having them follow your orders, and commitment, where they get that, they buy your vision, and they'll bust through walls for you without having to be told every single step of the way. And passionate, boy, how do we get the passions of people if we're not really empathetic? We really don't know who they are. And I think without empathy, you don't know who they are. So we're hiring human beings, not human doings. And I know it's cliche, and I've talked about that since my last book, but I think that's really true. So, non-negotiable, critical relationship to engagement and performance, critical relationship to the kind of workplaces we're trying to build.
How do you listen for that? I mean, what are you specifically listening for as a leader to make sure that your employees are actively pursuing what you want them to be pursuing, or working along with you and not, kind of against or askew from you?
I have this very simple tool. It's called asking questions. What are you hearing me say right now? Question mark. Shut up. What ideas do you have? What do you see that we could apply to make this better? Question mark. Shut up. How does this align or not align with stuff that's personally important to you? Question mark. Shut up. By asking good, I'm going to go back to my Forum Corporation days. By asking good, they call these high gain questions. They're open-ended questions, but really cause people to think, analyze, or speculate. It's not something you can just pick up a piece of paper and by asking it in a way that's not yes, no, that's an open-ended question. But these are high gain questions. By asking high gain questions, and by the way, that's a vital skill for leaders today. Asking good questions, shutting up, be curious, show that you have interest in the other person, not in a fake way. By golly, those people have a lot of ideas. Just need to find ways to cultivate them. It's almost like all this gold is laying on the ground and we're walking over the top of it because we've got job descriptions and quarterly goals that don't matter much anymore.
Yeah.
Because they're changing so quickly. So, you ask. Yesterday in my work with this group of mentors, I pulled a Ted Lasso quote, which shocked me. I used it and then went, oh my God, I heard that in Ted Lasso. And the quote is, be curious, not judgmental. Man, that just captures so much. Engage people's hearts, heads, minds, hands. And it's very different than just providing a kind of unilateral direction. You want people to show up like adults? Treat them like adults.
Yeah.
And engage them.
Do you think that's always been essential in leadership or taught? Because from an employee perspective, until a few years ago, it seems like employers in big corporations maybe didn't care as much about what their employees thought and felt. Is this new, or is this something that's always been around?
The concept of employee engagement, employee involvement, participative management's been around since the 70s. It has been settled research for the last 30 years. Now, is it more popular today? Has the zeitgeist changed to the point where it's a non-negotiable factor when I step into a leadership role? Probably has, but it's been out there. Like, I grew up in business in the 70s and 80s, and we did quality circles, and people would sit around and share ideas. And then you got into the quality movement where, again, brainstorming ideas and studying them and using a variety of tools to help employees have a voice in designing new approaches to process improvement. It's been around. In employee engagement, that's kind of the study of the 90s and the aughts. It's been around. It's easier to talk about now. It seems to be everywhere. Not new. The better leaders have been doing it for a long, long time.
If we're thinking about empathy for our employees as leaders, but you work with corporations that are huge, they have shareholders that want more profits. They want to see changes within these corporations that perhaps counterbalance what the employees want to see, especially in the age of burnout and, all of these other things that are happening in business right now. Can you be empathetic and also be working for your shareholders? And how does that work?
I think you have to be. I don't see opposing relationship between shareholder needs and employee needs.
Hmm.
In fact, I see them more as a Venn diagram with three circles. One is learning to value myself. I use the word honoring, which means that I'm taking care of myself. I'm leading from a grounded place. I'm present to my people, whatever that requires me to be, and how I care, kind of personal well-being is not a nice to have anymore. It's a need to have. The second Venn diagram is honoring you, how we have a clean relationship. There's not a lot of stuff unsaid. We learn how to manage both of those, honoring me and honoring you stuff. And the third Venn diagram is about honoring the organization. Jana, you and I could have a really wonderful, clean relationship if there's no business pressures put on,
Mm-hmm.
right? What do we do and with honoring the organization? So I think the three Venn diagrams are descriptive of the kind of relationships that are most productive in the workplace, not only for the humanity of people, but performance of the organization. And really what that says is, if I'm going to invest, as I'm a business leader, if I'm going to invest a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of opportunity in recruiting, in training, in onboarding, in employing someone, I want the highest level of output possible. Let's just take that off the table. I want that for sure.
Yeah.
The question is how we go about getting it, how we can work with the humanity. So I'm not feeling work today. Got to come in. Well, got it. You're not feeling work today. We also have this deadline that's going to go. How can we work to resolve both of those? If you have too many of those, I'm not feeling the whole work thing today, you got the wrong person. On the other hand, like boomers like me, if we only focus on the work stuff, we burn out, we grow disenchanted and pissed off. How do we learn to honor all of those things? It's a much more nuanced and subtle way of leading, but keeping in mind those three concentric circles in a Venn diagram. I think that's the challenge of leading today: honoring self, honoring the other, and honoring the organization.
Can you elaborate on honoring the organization, and perhaps is there even like a level of empathy to that?
Here's an example. And this is going to be the opening chapter of the next book that comes out called Honoring. Dinner party here in Bozeman with a neighbor, prominent surgeon. He was complaining about somebody from a different generation wanting to take a couple of hours off in an afternoon to watch her kid play soccer. I immediately said, "Hey, is this a problem employee?" "Oh no, this is a really good employee. And boy, if she made it through our screens to make it onto our surgical team, she's got to be really top notch." "Well, has this been a problem before?" "No, not really. She just asked for a couple hours afternoon off." "Then what's the fear?" "Well, if I do it for her, I got to do it for everybody else," and all that kind of stuff. It got into a real values difference. And basically he admitted, "I would have never done this. I wasn't allowed to take time off during my medical school training or in my residency. I had to suck it up and do whatever needed to be done." So it's not disruptive to the workflow because you've got a surgical schedule. Is it going to screw things up there? No. It's not disruptive to their relationship. It's not going to cause undue hardship to the rest of the surgical team. So the metrics that should matter were not considered. What mattered was it bumped up against his value and his training of, boy, if you're serious about this work, you don't take any time off. And I looked at him and said, what if she's not wrong?
Yeah.
What if she's not wrong to want a couple hours off? She's not trying to bust the bank. She's not trying to go against company norms, nor is she trying to screw up the surgical schedule. She just wants to watch her kid play soccer for a couple hours. What if she's not wrong? Is there a different way to think about this? And so that's the example of we're honoring the individual, but we look back at honoring the organization and ask those questions. Does it screw up the surgical schedule? No. Does it create all these other problems for the organization? Does it reduce the revenues? No. All those kinds of things. So asking those questions in light of what the organization needs as well, then finding a solution, to me, is the only way to go through this.
Yeah, there seems to be a notion some people have of, well, I didn't have this, so why should someone else get it? And it really comes up a lot in leadership and people who have been put through the work overtime, work until, midnight and miss your kids' soccer games, all of these things. How can someone with that mindset start to step out of it and see that just because they didn't have something doesn't mean other people also should not have it?
The other non-negotiable these days is that you've got to do your work. Leaders, and I'll quote Erin Rocchio, who happens to be my daughter, but is also a wonderful practitioner in this field. She said, leaders coming into this who haven't done their work are lost. That's step one. You have to do your work. And by doing your work means kind of a discovery of self. What do I prize? What do I value? Where are my blind spots? Where am I just subconsciously acting out of unexamined beliefs like that one? That's part of a leader's work these days. And, self-awareness is always number one. The inscription of the Oracle of Delphi and the Temple of Apollo back in the day was know thyself. And it's still the number one principle for effective leading. You leaders, know thyself. Do your freaking work. And part of that starts to get exposed to, what do I believe and why do I believe it? Well, I believe everybody needs to work 100 hours because I had to. Really? You really think that's required? Also working with somebody else, whether it's a friend or a coach or a peer or a spouse or partner of some sort, to kind of uncover those values is a really important thing to do. So that's all part of leading in this very, very turbulent Cuisinart of all of the stuff going on and spinning around a million miles an hour. If you're not centered and calm and self-aware in the middle of that, not much chance of coming out the other end with any sort of sanity or equilibrium, I'll say.
Yeah, know thyself is one of the hardest things humans have to do because we learn that that's so essential. I feel so late where we're not really learning ourselves for the first, for those years of life where we're really learning. We're kind of learning everyone else.
Part of the purpose of this podcast called Stepwise is to put forward the notion of wisdom as an essential component of leading other people. What does that mean? Do we all have to be my age to lead other people? No. Can wisdom be applied if you're 30 years old? Absolutely. Wisdom is the sum total of our life's experiences, our strengths, our failures, stuff we've learned from, scar tissue, all that stuff applied presently in the moment without bias, without judgment, that kind of stuff. When we can lead from that place, whether we're 30 or 70, we are going to be leading other people better. Now, think about this. There are 5 generations in the workplace right now, and every one of them has different values, different perspectives, different needs, different time horizons. Some want everything like right now because we've been trained to, instant gratification with data. Others, hey, let's talk about this. Every one of those 5 have different. And so leaders today need to A, get out of their own way, B, do their own work, and then C, if you think you've got an answer for 5 different generations of people simply because you have an org chart and a job description, man, you're a manager, you're not a leader.
I loved something from the Julie Kennedy Ehlert interview where she said, you need a mentor from different generations than you.
Loved it.
Can you talk about that a little bit, about having mentors from different generations? And I think how that can even expand your understanding of how to lead.
The human mind thinks in patterns. They think in what's called a gestalt. We see pieces of things together, and our mind puts it together in a whole pattern. These days, leaders are so busy, they'll get some pieces of information about the state of their business and the state of their people, which is usually little less, a little more obscure than metrics on top line, bottom line, et cetera. And so they'll make a pattern out of it. By getting a reverse mentor, which is what she was referring to, you can really find out what's going on with people that don't fit that pattern necessarily. And so, in a very good example, a very dear friend, and also one of our podcast guests in season 1, Paul Viviano at Children's Hospital, going through the pandemic, he realized that he needed to have a lot better information in a much more timely way than what was available through all the engagement surveys and all that stuff. So he found a nurse who was 3 generations his junior, late 20s, early 30-something nurse. And he asked her to have the kind of relationship where she could mentor him. What's the workforce feeling? If it came out this way, what do we need to do? How do we need to communicate it? How do we need to get people's points of view on this? And boy, she told him like it was.
Wow.
It was a really incredible source of valuable wisdom from her to him, just based on her own perspectives. And that kind of filled out the picture. So you want to be a leader in touch with your whole organization. You have a reverse mentoring relationship. Find somebody who's not necessarily in your line. This was in the nursing practice, but find somebody who's willing to tell you the truth. They don't have an agenda. They don't have an axe to grind. They just want to tell you the truth.
Yeah. And I think one thing I've heard you say, maybe not in these words, but throughout your interviews, is like wisdom happens in reflection. Mm-hmm. And I think by having a mentor outside of your generation, it helps you to reflect on, how am I performing for this section of my workforce, or for this person who, for me, it would be outside of my generation to have a mentor who is at the end of their career. And so how does that performance look for me? How am I doing by their standards, and what can they teach me? And so I think this podcast does a lot of that, encourages reflection. And also in the work that we do, reflection should be a part of that. Your daughter's book, Wholeness at Work, really guides people through that, reflecting on, their own beliefs and their own way of working. There's so many great resources on that as well.
Yeah, for our listeners, Erin T. Rocchio, Wholeness at Work. Very, very good book. Available, I think, everywhere.
Yeah. Kind of switching gears a little bit, I'm curious what leadership trend makes you roll your eyes right now.
Well, you know this about me. I'm not big into bullying and the use of power as a leadership technique. We see a lot of that. It's not just politics, but it is many times when people are pressed for, quote, results, they stop listening and they start pushing. Now, pushing for results, cool. Hey, look, I'm an MBA. That's all good. It's how you go about it and how you treat other people as you do it. And so there's this notion of power over as a leadership technique versus power with. And I'm not a big power over. Now, the bullying thing takes it to a new level. It is, there's a bit of not only this is what I want done, but you're lesser if you don't do it this way. There is some command and some cases threat and some cases shame. Those are the things that are being popularized in the news today. If you look at what people are calling leadership, I'm not a big fan of. Not a big fan of. Yeah, it's decisions made without full data. It's decisions made that affect a lot of people without input from a lot of people. It's things done for expediency or for one stakeholder group in your organization without consideration of the whole. I think we're past that, and especially in the corporate world. Look, Here's my argument for kind of engaged whole person leading. You know what it costs to replace a person these days? It's crazy. It's not only expensive to have them out of the, like somebody leaves you in a hole. So there's lost performance, there's lost opportunity, there's an opportunity cost. But there's also recruitment costs, training costs, onboarding costs, lack of productivity until they get up to speed cost. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars for an executive. I
Wow.
don't know how many good executives are going to stick around and just be order takers. They want to apply their brains, their experience, their heart, their hands to make something powerful happen. And so the minute I start getting, I'm an A performer. The minute I start getting told what to do, how to do it, when to do it, why to do it, dude, I'm checking out. I'm going to go somewhere else where my head, heart, hands, and spirit are considered.
Yeah, or else what's the point? You
Or
have,
what's the point?
yeah. You've mentioned a few times that you're a hard-boiled MBA, I think is the terminology you use. And I'm curious if you could expand on what you mean by that and if you reflect on that time in your life when you were going through the MBA program or perhaps before, like what would you say to yourself now with all of the knowledge you have, helping other leaders, building your own businesses? Yeah, what advice would you have for yourself?
Yeah, for me, knowledge of organizational systems, including financial systems, operational systems, human resource systems, critical. It is a necessary but not sufficient set of tools and mindsets and skill sets for a leader in any organization. Having a knowledge about how to read books and how to improve profit margins and stuff. That's what you learn in business school. You learn how to be a good manager.
Mm-hmm.
That's different than leading.
Mm,
And not a lot of organizations spend as much time, universities, business schools, spend as much time talking about how you lead others uh, as they do on how to manage an organization. I think leading and managing are complementary, but they're not the same thing. So my focus has been on leadership. Okay, great. We got all that stuff. We have all the systems. Systems can help reinforce a culture, but they can't create the culture. The leaders and the people create the culture. And culture is a huge determinant of performance. So, but I think the management skills and the systems knowledge are really, really good. I think they're necessary, but they're not sufficient to be an effective business leader in today's world.
What's the main difference between manager and leader? What changes you from one to the next?
16 inches.
Hmm.
16 inches. Systems can generally are built to be robust, and they can generally be done without a lot of empathic relationship connection, stuff like that. When you are leading from what do others want and feel? What do others need? How is my message resonating with them? How do I get them to play at their highest and best? That's not a question for a manager. That's a question for a leader. So really it is take all these systems, let's make them work, let's make them sing. And the biggest expense item in any business organization is your workforce.
Mhm.
How do I get the most out of that? Well, it has to do with relatedness and connection. That's the basic human social needs. We all need that, but again, not often taught in business schools to the extent that I think it should be.
Is that the lesson you would tell yourself?
It is. Yeah, I put myself through college and business school, and I was working. And so I really wanted to learn about systems, and I learned. And so I was a production manager in an early stage digital company in Hollywood, California, while I went to UCLA in my undergrad.
Wow.
Yep. And I really wanted to learn how to make systems more efficient. So I did. And I could shave pennies and minutes and hours off things. And I'd look at workflows and I could analyze the workflow and figure it all out. So I was a really good manager, I thought. But I learned the value of people and leading as a real differentiator. Look, everybody can learn systems, but not everybody has a connectedness with people.
Do you know of the moment, or can you reflect and think of the moment that you feel like you became a leader? You transformed from manager to leader?
My background is a little bit funny in that I was a practitioner of consulting, change, leadership, and coaching while I was trying to build an organization. So my first thrust was to build a community of practitioners, not necessarily a firm.
Hmm.
And a community of practitioners, they're going to go off and do their thing and they're going to be in the field and I'm never going to see them. And so I have to get talent. Didn't worry about leading a firm. Around the turn of the century and partnering with my current business partner, Matt Brubaker, we started to look a lot more at the leadership elements of building this practice into a business, a firm. And then I think that's when it shifted.
Because you had to start thinking, how do I create a culture and actually lead and inspire people within this organization?
Yes, and sustainably so.
Hmm.
We wanted to build something that was sustainable. Now, at the time, I had 3 family members working in the firm, so I had real great motivation to really want to create something sustainable. I didn't want to work till I was, 85 years old, but I did want the incredible charism of the firm to carry on.
Hmm.
What are we about? We are about caring for others. We are about caring for others, in our case, who care for other people. We're very focused on healthcare, and we really believed in that mission. We wanted to keep doing it. We wanted to keep helping healthcare leaders do wonderful things for their people because they are curing and helping and alleviating pain and suffering of a lot of other people. So how do we create that sustainably? And when you start asking that question, that's a different question than
Yeah.
do I put 10 practitioners in a room?
For people listening who might not know, can you kind of give us some quick cliff notes of the businesses you've built and the ways you've led? I believe you've built 3 businesses.
Well, let's consider the main one is FMG Leading, founded in 1984 and still producing some incredible results for healthcare organizations. We have about 50 employees and a bunch of subcontractors, and we are primarily devoted to healthcare leadership in this country,
Wow.
both from the investor side as well as the acute care um, provider side. We're now into payers through large insurers, and but we're also into we do a lot of work with distributed delivery systems. That's a fancy way of saying if you have a veterinary hospital in Bozeman, Montana, you're usually part of a larger system where veterinary hospitals exist across the country. We work with those companies.
Okay.
So in veterinary medicine, in hospice, in blood, in surgery, in dialysis, in home care, we work with a lot of those distributed delivery systems as part of those organizations. That's the primary business. There is a second business that I don't run. I did for a couple of years with a partner, but it's a high-end fly fishing lodge.
Wow.
Go figure. And now I'm properly in the role of I'm one of 7 investors in the thing, and I just go enjoy it.
Amazing.
So all of these things don't apply.
I could ask 1,000 questions about FMG leading and what led you into the healthcare space and the kinds of stresses that brings. I would love to ask you that sometime. I know we have only a few minutes left.
By the way, I can answer that question quickly.
Oh, please.
I started out in my career as a consultant, working with a very large financial institution out of New York that had very poor reputation for how they treated people. It was Citibank, and I don't know, it still has that. But at the time, Citibank was known as a very high standards place, but whose culture is you climb over each other's backs to get to the top. And so I worked with that and did my thing to help them be effective. And then I got an opportunity to work on a faculty at St. Joseph Health System, a Catholic-sponsored system of, at the time, 8 or 9 hospitals in California and Texas. And I got in there and I loved the people.
Wow.
I loved why they were there. I loved how they showed up. I loved the compassion they showed for each other and me. I went, these are the kind of people I want to hang out with. And literally, it was that simple. That was in 1987. And so ever since then, that's been the primary focus of our practice, this healthcare um, industry. We are so aligned in values, and we are aligned with the kind of people we are and they are. We are so mission oriented. It just makes everything fit well. So anyway, that's how that happened.
Wow, that's beautiful. And thinking about this topic of empathy, I'm assuming it's probably pretty hard to find people more empathetic than leaders or workers in the healthcare industry. Do you have a lesson you've learned from working with so many healthcare workers?
Wow, so many. We all work for the why. At the end of the day, we all work for the why. We very few people anymore work for just the paycheck. Look, you can start an account on TikTok and make a couple 100,000 a year without having to be any sort of values alignment. But the rest of us, we don't work for a paycheck. We work because we want to make a difference. We work for the why, and boy, no clearer why than healthcare. So I learned that the people that are there, they could be making lots of more money in other industries than they do, and they're there for a very important reason. I was talking to a leader. Well, I'm here because my parents went through some problems with their kidneys and they were in the hospital, and I learned to have compassion for the great care providers, and it changed my life, and so I decided to devote my life to that. I
Yeah.
shifted my focus in business school to public administration or healthcare administration as a result of it. You hear those stories over and over and over again.
Yeah, Roberta Tinch talks about that in her interview this season about how she came into that from a parent being
Yep.
involved in the healthcare system. So it is such a beautiful thing to hear over and over again. Wrapping up this idea of empathy, I'm curious, is there a time when a leader should not be empathetic?
Empathy does not mean collusion with.
Mm,
Empathy does not mean agreement with. I want to always be empathetic. I always want to understand what people believe and what they're going through. That does not necessitate me making a decision that doesn't also honor the organization. So, my short answer is no. There's not ever a time where people shouldn't be empathetic. There are times when the needs of the organization, honoring the organization, will need to take precedence over the needs of the workforce. Hopefully, that's a temporary situation and not terribly recurring. There are those times. That doesn't mean we don't want to know what people are feeling, how this is impacting them. We don't want to not be respectful of them. We always want that. So I I'll probably give this a lot more thought, but right now I would say empathy is always a value. And again, we don't need to act on it. We don't need to dishonor, but
it sounds like that sort of discernment would take a lot of continuous sharpening and trying to understand other people and your organization, continued learning. I know you ask every guest, what are you reading? What are you listening to right now? And you always have great books that you're reading and podcasts you're listening to. So I'm curious if you have anything right now at the top of mind that you've been reading, listening to, engaging with that's helping you in your leadership.
one of my as they call them, saw sharpening things. The way I renew is I've gotten into fiction lately
Nice.
that has nothing to do with leadership, although it kind of does.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you're familiar with the best-selling author Kristen Hanna.
Yes.
I've gotten deeply into Kristen Hanna. And the first book, I forgot the name of it. It's about nurses, but it is fantastic. It starts in Coronado Island, where Kathy and I spend a lot of time. Yeah, and it's about the story of this one nurse who grows up in the jungles of Vietnam in these MASH hospitals. Fabulous. And highly recommended. Anyway, I've spent a lot of time in the last 3 months with Kristen Hanna. I'm reading a book called The Inner Work of Age. And, we talk a lot about multi generations. Well, my generation is aging out. So how do we make a transition from huge contributors and where that, as boomers, was a critical part of our lives to now having something different and something less? So the inner work of age is a Jungian approach to um, kind of aging and next steps, as is the book by Arthur C. Brooks that was just so fundamental to the last year or two for me, called From Strength to Strength. It's highly recommended to anybody. But I think those three reading sources have been really super helpful.
Yeah, I've recently read Kristen Hanna's The Great Alone, based in
Great alone.
Alaska.
That's the one.
Beautiful,
That's, oh
yeah,
my God.
beautiful story.
With the amount of time we spend up in Alaska, I had to read that.
Yeah. Did it make you
And
a
there's,
little scared for?
oh my God. Well, Alaska is vast and wild. You know, it's funny, moving from California to Montana, I felt the same thing here. Like things are just a little bit more extreme. And it sounds silly
Mhm.
because we still have roads, although half of them are not paved. And most of them are 2 lane, but you hit a patch of ice and you're in a ditch. Well, that happens all the time here. Or you're driving down the road and it's not if you're going to hit a deer or an elk, you're going to do it. It's just a question of when.
Yeah.
Things are a little bit harder, a little bit more extreme. Multiply that times 10, and that's Alaska. And so it gives you a healthy reverence for the wildness and the vastness of that beautiful place.
Yeah, I think fiction has so much to teach us, and these beautiful stories that people write, reflecting on those and thinking about the wilderness we live in or these cities we live in. It's all
Yeah.
just really great to reflect on. I love to hear that you're reading more fiction these days.
Yeah. A lot of fun.
Is there anything else you wanted to cover quickly before we hop off?
Yeah. Um, this is cliche. I've heard this from others, and I would simply state in these tumultuous times, let's be kind to one another.
Hmm.
Let's give each other a bit of grace. Let's honor and respect each other as opposed to trying to find the differences. My study over the last 2 years into this notion of honoring has really brought that home to me more. Is what is it that I can find in you that is worthy of respect and deep admiration? Because we all have that.
Yes.
And if we go to the clickbait and we go to the things that name calling and judging, that is not our highest and best. And so let's be kind to one another and let's appreciate, the goodness in each of us. Not cliche, but for real.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this and can't wait to ask you the rest of these questions someday.
All fun, excited anytime.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Jana.
Wow. It's rare to find leaders who are so willing to give of themselves, not only to high level executives, but also to people like me who are in the beginning of their leadership journeys. There is so much value packed into this podcast, and I highly encourage you, if you enjoyed this, to go back and listen to seasons 1 and 2 of Stepwise, where Foster interviews wonderful executives from all different industries and with all different experiences. These interviews are truly one of a kind. He asks deep questions from leader to leader, and I highly recommend it to anyone on a business building or career building journey. If you want to find out more about Foster, he has a wonderful book called Leadership: The True Path to Great Leading. It is so wonderfully written. We talked a little bit about fiction in this interview today, and this book has such a beautiful novelistic approach where he outlines a story of two people really trying to find their path on a leadership journey. I reference it all the time and highly recommend it to you as well. But I'm going to leave you with something Foster always says. Set the table, invite cool people, magic happens. Until next time, Stepwise. Thank you for listening to Stepwise. Stepwise is brought to you by Dr. Foster Mobley. Edited and promoted by Zettist. You can listen to more episodes wherever you stream podcasts. Find out more at fostermobleymt.com or follow us on social media at Foster Mobley. That's FOSTERMOBLEY.
We look forward to having an inspiring conversation with you soon.